We have Peter Zeihan on right now. This is the kind of, he wrote a book called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization. Look, people ask me what books to read. This has got to be at the top of the list. It's got to be at the top of the list. I mean, the Financial Times called it one of the top 10 books to read. This is such an important book. If you want to know where the world is heading, this guy's in the prediction business, which is always dicey, but it's so hard to argue with the kind of thing that he essentially says is going to happen, or the things that are going to happen. It's a book that I'm going to recommend to literally everybody I know. Listen to it read, or at least listen to him talk. And this podcast hopefully did a good job of capturing a lot of the things he's talking about. But let's do some housekeeping first, shall we, kids? Boston, Massachusetts, Laugh Boston, I am coming to you. New Year's Eve, December 29, 30, 31, San Diego Comedy Club, Mic Drop Comedy, January 5, 6, and 7, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Summit Comedy Club, January 13 and 14, Dania, Florida, Dania Improv, January 19, 20, 21, and Nashville, Tennessee, Zanies, March 2, 3, and 4. And now, without further ado, I give you Peter Zeihan. Let's rock and roll.
Bryan Callen, this is his intro song. Bryan Callen, it's one hell of an intro song. His comedy is marvelous. He's a genius in world politics.
This is the mother of all shows, the Bryan Callen Show, and I am very excited. I have Peter Zeihan on the show. Peter, I've listened to you a ton on YouTube, and I got obsessed. And then, of course, I read the book. The End of the World is Just the Beginning. Mapping the Mapping the end of globalization.
Mapping the collapse of globalization.
Yes, mapping the collapse of globalization. And first of all, I read the book. And I realized I have to read it a second and a third time, because I'm going to ingest this. And like I told you before we started recording, I'm going to sound like the smartest dude at every party and at every dinner. I'm going to be the most obnoxious person, and I'm going to just take all your ideas as my own. And I'm going to go like this. I'll be shrugging. But, it's an ambitious book, man. You got a lot of guts, because you're in the prediction business. You're in the prediction business.
I am.
And when I sent one of your lectures to my father, who spent most of his time overseas working in the banking, in international banking. By the way, in the Middle East and in Saudi Arabia, in Lebanon and Greece and Pakistan and India and all of that through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, he kind of said, I'm not in the prediction business. I got out of business a long time ago, and blah, blah, blah. And because, most of what we hear is China is going to crush all of us. And, the United States is in big, big trouble. And here you come along saying China may not exist in 10 years, et cetera, et cetera. So I've got so many questions for a man who has the guts to be this articulate. And I got to also, just before we get into this, a little more ass kissing. I've already complimented you on your man bun. The fact that you've got this thick head of hair and you're 6'5", which is bullshit, incredibly articulate. But the breadth of knowledge, the amount what I forgot was how much goes into the world I live in. I mean, just in a pair of blue jeans, for example, like the number of players involved in bringing that to market and getting them on my legs. It's everything is so interconnected. And it's a pessimistic book. I wouldn't want to be Germany. I wouldn't want to be China. I wouldn't want to be South Korea. There are so many countries I wouldn't want to be. And I found myself thanking my lucky stars that I was born in the United States, because geography has so much to do with where we're headed in the 21st century. So I guess the first question would be, you wrote this book, I think it was 2022, and by your own admission, you said by the time you start reading this book, and I listened to you, actually, I listened to the recording.
Oh, so you had 17 hours of this.
Well, yes, but it's great because you're so articulate, but is there anything, it's almost like you do have this crystal ball, because Germany's clearly burning coal and wood because they're freezing right now. And so a lot of what you've said seems to have come true. What I'm hoping is that we are going to be able to innovate ourselves out of famine. And maybe with this new development of sort of fusion without nuclear energy that I just read about, maybe there are inventions that will solve the energy crisis.
Well, do you want to start by talking about technology?
Yes.
Sure. So, necessity is the mother of invention. We're all familiar with that, and it's all totally true. But first, you have to have the necessity. So we've been living in this wonderful moment going back to roughly 1945, when everything has been available on a global scale, at global economies of scale. And that is what allowed, for example, the Germans to import all this natural gas from the Russian space and then play around with the green transition, even though they're not a windy or a sunny country. They tend to... Well, they flat out lie about their statistics. They only get about 9% of their electricity from green tech. They get more from lignite than they do from coal, more from coal from everything else combined, or that's remaining. Wow. And so now they're going back to
in 2000.
Oh yeah. No, they've spent a huge amount of money, and they've tested the technology to the limits. And for the rest of us to benefit from that has been great. But it's just wildly inappropriate technology for where they live. So in order to innovate past this, now that we're actually having the crisis, and now that their Enron-style accounting methods for their carbon emissions are being laid to bear, they can start the innovation process. But we know that wind and solar cannot be part of that because it's not a windy and sunny country. And we know that natural gas can't really be a part of that because it would have to be shipped in from a different continent, and it takes 3 to 8 years for a new field to come online, much less the supporting infrastructure. So their choices are very simply, in the short term, nuclear, coal, and lignite.
What is lignite? I'm sorry, I don't know what
lignite is. A soft, wet form of brown coal that is 20% water by weight. It is the dirtiest of the fuels, and it is Germany's primary fuel source. Has been for 15 years, ever since they started the energy transition.
Wow, that's unbelievable. What kind of blew me away, but one of the things that blew me away about this book is the amount of detailed knowledge you have on what makes a country run, the amount of energy it takes just getting energy from point A to point Z. That's what's kind of fascinating as well. But so keep going with this, because I'm sorry to interrupt you on that.
It's fine. It's really your show.
I know, but I'm just there's so many things that are blowing my mind. Like when I hear people say we are going to outgrow oil, and we are going to come online, we're going to electrify our entire economy. Well, then I read that you were talking about how important cobalt is to all our entire, I have a Tesla, and talk about a carbon footprint. I mean, the way you describe what goes into just having my electric car, the cobalt, the lithium, and all the other sort of materials that require China to sort of, it's created on a coal grid, if you will, right? So without cobalt, I mean,
honestly, it's not just cobalt. There's a whole variety of materials. I'm oversimplifying here a little bit, but if you have a thermal power plant or a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle, basically you're lighting a match, burning something, capturing the heat, and that's what makes conventional fossil fuels work. You don't need a lot of materials aside from the fuel itself, obviously, to make that happen. But if you want to electrify, then you need a very different system for the motor and the turbine and the axles even. And at the end of the day, you also then are moving stuff. And when you are moving stuff with electricity, it requires a lot more energy. An electric water heater, as a rule, is going to require a lot more power than a natural gas-fired one. And so you have to also make the product lighter. And so you need an order of magnitude more materials than what you need for a conventional vehicle. And you need an order of magnitude different materials. You don't just need steel. You need steel and aluminum and silicon and cobalt and lithium and copper and zinc and all the rest. One of the sexy ideas of green tech is that we could finally break the geographic links of oil geopolitics that we all know and we all hate, where we have to deal with Venezuela and Iran and Iraq and Russia. It's agonizing, it's painful, it's expensive, it's dangerous. But if you want to do the green transition at scale, you then need Canada and Mexico and Peru and Bolivia and Ecuador and Chile and Argentina and Brazil and Australia and Indonesia and Malaysia and India and Pakistan and Turkey and Mongolia and Turkey. I already said Turkey, Mongolia and Kazakhstan. There we go. And China and Nigeria and Congo and South Africa and Gabon. And oh, yes, still Russia. We are discovering right now that we cannot have globally available fossil fuels at a reasonable price without the Russians. But there's no way in hell we can do the green transition without them, because they're a top 3 producer for most of the materials that we're going to need. And we're going to need 10 times what we have now.
I mean, this is what I was like reading this, and I thought to myself, anybody who is all about the green revolution just needs to read this, a couple of paragraphs of your book.
Yeah, if you really, really want to do the green transition with the technology we have today, then you have to love carbon and you have to love dictatorships.
That's the soundbite right there. I mean but it's, I mean, you make such a powerful argument for that. I don't see, so I guess what you're trying to say is that for now we are not going green without a whole lot of oil.
We are not going green with today's technology at scale. Now, there are specific geographies. I mean, the whole point of the book is that geography really does matter.
Yes.
And there are places today where the green transition at scale makes sense, places where the solar intensity is high and reliable and the wind intensity is high and reliable. And if you are in those zones, then the technologies we have today can work. What we're seeing right now within the green community is this delightful conversation, primarily between the Californian Greens and the German Greens, because we have very similar policies in both places in terms of encouraging green tech to be put on the grid en masse. Now, the Germans have spent 3 times as much as the Californians have, but the Californians get 10 times as much electricity because the sun shines in California.
Right.
And so they're having this debate and this conversation. It's very quizzical about why in one place is it working broadly, because, it's still California, and why in the other place is it leading to complete deindustrialization? Well, and the answer is basic geography. They should have had this conversation 15 years ago. But now that we're coming up against this wall of absolute shortages in all the materials that are needed, the green community is coming to the belated conclusion that they're going to have to choose where to do this, where it will actually work. And if you put up solar panels and wind turbines in Germany as a rule, you're drastically increasing your carbon footprint. Whereas if you put them in California, you're actually doing what in theory is supposed to happen. Now, it's turning into a knife fight because the blind ideologues refuse to admit that basic geography maybe has a role in this conversation. But we're finally having that conversation.
Is that conversation being had in the Biden administration, in these different, or is it's still politically pretty incorrect? I mean, can you imagine if AOC and Biden, whoever it would be, said, guys, green's not going to work? Peter Zeihan's book just said, proves it. We're not, it sounds great, but you got to drastically increase your carbon footprint if you want things to run by the sun or by wind. I mean, that's
the Biden administration is in this weird spot because obviously politically they're trying to firm up the green position within the Democratic coalition because we're going through a political reshuffling in the United States. But the Biden administration also has 2 other advantages. Number one, countries like Germany have worked out a lot of the kinks in the technology, so it's much better than it was 20 years ago. So there's a low-hanging fruit argument. And then second, you've got the Great Plains in the United States. You've got the Southwest in the United States. You have some very good green tech zones. So you can apply this stuff at scale and have it actually make sense. Now, if you're putting up solar in New York, you're an idiot. Yeah. And luckily, there's not a lot of that going on. But the Northeast, as a rule, and this is a gross over-exaggeration, tends to set standards that can't be met in the United States for their fuels, and then they just import them. And since the stuff is produced somewhere else, it doesn't count against their carbon content.
Well, what about nuclear, man? What I mean, doesn't nuclear solve all our problems?
It should be part of the solution. I agree. It's carbon free. There's a waste issue for disposal that has not been solved, and it does not look like it's going to be solved anytime soon. I would argue there the issue is time. Like if we know we have an energy crisis today and we decide we want to do a power plant build out in order to fix some of this stuff, assuming that there was not a single regulation that had to be met and we could start shoveling in the ground today, you're not going to get first power from those plants in 7 years. We just don't have that kind of time.
Does Russia know? Does Saudi Arabia, Iran, do these countries know that they're not going to? They are going to be just as relevant in 20 years as they are today. Are they aware of that? Because I kept thinking to myself, man, the poor Saudis or the poor Iranians. I mean, the poor Russians. Nobody needs your oil anymore. And boy, was I naive. I mean,
well, there's a much broader change going on here than just the green transition. We're looking at a breakdown of the entire globalized structure. Part of this is strategic. The Americans created globalization basically as a bribe to convince everyone to be on our side during the Cold War, and it worked.
Right.
But 1992, the Cold War ended, and we've been edging away ever since. And then second, population structures have evolved. It used to be everyone lived on a farm. But as the world globalized, it also industrialized and urbanized. And as people moved off the farm and into the cities to take manufacturing jobs, they went from living on 40 acres with a pig to living in a condo with a Shih Tzu. Yeah. And they went from kids being free labor to being very expensive habits. And so we went from having 7 kids to 1.2. You play that forward 75 years, and it's not that the world is running out of children. That happened 30 years ago. We're now on the edge of running out of working age adults. And without adults, you don't get the production, you don't get the consumption that is the basis of international trade. So we're in this environment now where we've had a really good run that demographically speaking was just a brief moment in time, and now we've aged out. Yeah, and in that sort of environment, demand for products drops. And you remove the Americans from providing the security environment that allows very, very slow-moving super tankers to just inch their way around the world, and everyone is going to have to trade everything differently. And countries that are a long way from their end markets have to reevaluate what is possible. And for places like Iran and Russia, not a lot makes the list.
Yeah, you were talking about something that I'd never thought about as well, which was the United States has been policing the waterways since World War II, essentially free of charge. So that when you were moving goods from point A to point B, you never had to worry about things like piracy or getting jacked for your tanker, all the stuff in your tanker. And I think this amazing statistic from 1950 to 1972 or 78, like there wasn't one zero. There wasn't one hijacking of a boat. I mean, which is crazy to me. It's something, again, I never thought about. And you are saying that now that the United States no longer has an interest in policing our international waterways, you think that there is going to be more and more of this sort of piracy on the high seas, where it's going to cost money for a country to get their goods from point A to point B, because they're going to have military escort, et cetera. Yeah.
You can call it piracy. You can call it state piracy. You can call it privateering. All of these options are now on the table, and you might not have to wait all that much longer. It was just last week that the Europeans put their price cap on Russian crude and essentially said that any Russian crude exported through its Western ports is persona non grata in the European space. All of a sudden, countries that don't like the Russians very much have a vested national interest in interrupting those flows, because those flows don't go to them anymore. So if you're Latvia and you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, you could send out a Coast Guard vessel and confiscate a Russian cargo, and no one in Europe will. The Chinese will, but they're on the other side of the planet. So we're now in a position where instead of having a single oil market where everyone has a vested interest in keeping it flowing, even if it doesn't come to them, we now have a split system where parts of the world have a very clear interest in some flows, but not others. This feels a lot like the 1930s.
Yeah, geez, that is. You can see a lot of sort of small what is the word, interscene wars going on, or at least I mean, it's almost like the high seas are now maybe going to become like the Wild West. I mean, it's countries are going to go, hey, we need that oil, and we're jacking your ship, and you can complain to the United Nations if you want. What is Russia's Navy like?
Oh, it doesn't have much. Part of that's geography. They don't have a unified maritime space like most countries do. So, like, let's say you're Spain. You know, your fleet splits its time between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean, and there's an easy body of water with Gibraltar to connect the two. So you really only need one navy. Well, the Russian landmass has Arctic ice on one side and Europe splitting its Baltic and its Black Sea fleets, and then it's got the Pacific fleet as well. So 4 separate fleets that cannot reinforce. Even at the height of the Soviet period, when it was the world's second most powerful navy, it was split in 4. So it was the kind of thing that, you know, the Brits by themselves could have defeated those 4 chunks in detail. Now you're talking about them just having a handful of functional ships in each one. And as we've seen in the Black Sea, even their most advanced warships can be taken out by a relatively low-tech cruise missile.
So Russia. So you think that countries will not be afraid of Russia? I mean, I'd be very afraid of Russia in one way or another. But I guess if they can't do anything to you on the high seas, they're still a nuclear power. Do you think
Russia is very powerful in certain ways, but if you are not within a fighter bomber flight from the Russian coast, you really are free and clear.
Really? So you don't think that so you think there's a real incentive for any state that needs oil to just jack their ships, and they must know this?
Well, I'm not saying that this is my personal recommendation. I'm saying it's probably going to be happening, and anything that is true for the Russians in terms of lack of retaliatory capability, it's also true for every country in the Persian Gulf.
Really? God.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're Saudi Arabia and you're sending your crude out, your navy is literally a couple of rowboats. It's like countries could hijack your ships within sight of your ports and you couldn't do anything about it.
What are those countries, do you think? What are the countries that are going to be the bad actors on the high seas?
I would think that the one to watch most closely is going to be Saudi Arabia, because I think they're going to do things. When you remove the Americans from the Persian Gulf, it's up to the locals to figure out who's in charge. And the Saudis and the Iranians have some very clear ideas on that topic. Saudi Arabia has far more capacity to intervene in the Persian Gulf than Iran does. And Iran has to ship all of its crude out through the Strait of Hormuz, whereas the Saudis can ship things via the Petroline West across the peninsula to the Red Sea ports. So they could actually close the Strait of Hormuz and profit from it while destroying the Iranian economy. And I think that's something we just have to pencil in at this point.
That's something the United States will have to get involved in one way or another. Yeah. I mean,
why?
Well, we're going to be, I feel like we're going to be drawn into these situations because with that kind of interference in goods and in commodities, in oil, our marketplace overseas is going to be impacted. And we want to ship things overseas that we make in the United States.
The United States only depends on international trade for about 12% of its GDP, and about half of that is NAFTA. And now
so Mexico is really our biggest.
Mexico is where it's at, and it's going to be where it's at for the next several decades for sure. And we have a legal structure in the United States for cutting out the United States from global energy flows in order to keep our surplus production locked up at home. So if we ever do get into an energy crisis, and I think we're going to see this next year, we'll have the Biden administration closing the door on exports, which will supersaturate our market. And there's a lot of details that need to be worked out. There's especially in the American Northeast, which imports its fuels. But overall, you supersaturate the American market, you'll have energy prices going down here as they go up everywhere else. And remember that Saudi Arabia and Iran, that tiff, that's just kind of the first one. If you've got flows going out from the Persian Gulf, I would argue that the country that we need to get into the mindset of being the most disruptive in terms of energy trade is India.
India?
Yeah, they're the first major stop out of the Persian Gulf. Every drop of crude that flows to China goes by Indian coast, and India is a real country with a real navy and a real air force, and it would be child's play for them to capture every single Chinese tanker. And you want to talk about something that would destroy the Chinese nation in a matter of months? That would do it.
But that would be an act of war. And now
it would.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do that without a degree of provocation, but I think we all agree these days that the Chinese are being a bag of dicks. So it really doesn't take that much of a push.
A bag of dicks. It is true. I couldn't believe when you said that for example, the Uyghurs, the Chinese Communist Party has monitors living in their house to make sure they don't procreate.
It's genocide through a unique approach, that's for sure.
And you are not optimistic about Xi's future, which you explain the lockdowns. I couldn't understand what they were doing in Shanghai. I couldn't understand it. It was so crazy. They were bolting people into their own apartments. I don't know how they were getting food or anything. Their dogs were dying. It was the most horrific. It is Orwellian. And maybe worse. And yet you said that because of their draconian lockdowns, they don't have herd immunity. Is that still the case? Is that what's going on, or is this the Chinese government using this as an opportunity for total population control once again?
I think actually today. So December 13th, the Chinese suspended the app that monitored everybody's movement, which was something that a lot of people who were concerned about privacy and national control thought would never happen, regardless of what happened with COVID. So at least to a degree, the Chinese have been concerned about health. The problem is, by demonizing vaccines that came from outside of the country, they were left with the ones they made themselves, and the ones that they made themselves we now know broadly don't work. Countries like Indonesia, the UAE, Chile, they used the Chinese vaccines in their first round, and when they discovered that it barely worked against the original strain and was useless against Alpha, Delta, and Omicron, they discontinued the Chinese vaccines completely. But the Chinese, having spent 2 years talking about how the American vaccines will make you infertile and magnetic, can't go out and push those on their own people. So the Chinese population is they're vaccinated, but they're not vaccinated with something that works. And they have been successful.
A command economy, top-down control is I think the Chinese have proved that is a disaster. And
it works great when nothing changes.
Right.
Yeah, it's like if you understand the baseline and the baseline never moves, a command economy is okay. But yes, in a more dynamic situation, sure, you can make decisions more quickly, but it also means if you make the wrong decision, it's a disaster. And they've made several wrong decisions in a row.
But also one of the wrong decisions was that one-child policy. So, I mean, let me see if I got this right. China is now dealing with the fact that they are not at sustainable population growth. More people are dying than are being born. They don't have
that's been the case since 1985. Amazing.
And you had so many people screaming for zero population growth because we were going to breed ourselves out of existence and everything else. Well, the Chinese took that to heart. So they don't have a young population of workers that can support their older population, and by the way, consume enough to keep their economy going. And secondly, it sounds like because they don't have enough natural gas, they are going to have fertilizer issues, or already are, and so they are looking at famine. I mean, you're saying that the Chinese that famine looms on the horizon, which was shocking to me.
We're conflating a couple issues here. They're very real, but they're not interconnected. So let's start with the population issue. When countries urbanize, they have fewer kids. Well, China didn't really begin their urbanization program until 1980, which is about the same time that the one-child policy kicked in. So you got the world's most constrictive population growth policy in it at the same time you started the world's most rapid urbanization process. And so the birth rate today in Beijing and Shanghai is the lowest of any urban centers in world history, less than 0.8 children per woman. Wow. And it's been so low for so long that there are no longer enough Chinese under age 40 to have enough children to generate a new generation.
Oh my God. So even if they wanted to, even if they wanted to.
So they've already changed the one-child policy to two-child to three-child, and now it's largely actually abolished. But it was too late, and there are not enough people who could have the kids. And of the people who want kids, they're all living in condos, so there's no space to have a kid. So basically, China concentrated 10 generations of economic development and urbanization into 40 years. And it's over. You can only do that once. And there's now no longer enough people to have a next generation. So on the demographic numbers alone, China will be gone by 2030. That assumes nothing else goes wrong. The Ukraine war is crisis, and China is the last country in line, so they suck up most of that. China imports 80% of the stuff they need to grow their food, so you have a disruption in agricultural markets or phosphate markets or potash markets. China sucks up the entirety of that. China is dependent upon access to other countries to sell its goods because it no longer has enough young people to buy them itself. So if the Americans decide to close the trade doors, that destroys China too. Everything that has worked well for the world for the last 75 years has benefited China, but none of it has been because of something China did. China was just fortunate to develop in that specific environment, and now it's ended.
And if you're Xi or you're the ruling class or you're Chinese in general, I mean, what are you going to do? What are they pulling their hair out? Do you think they know this as well as you know this? Is this something that is at the forefront of, Xi's brain and everybody else who's in charge?
I think there was an understanding when Xi came in 10 years ago of just how deep the problem was. And excuse me. I also think there was an understanding of how little China could do to address any of this, because you basically would have to crawl on the floor on your stomach to the Americans' feet and beg for dispensation. I mean, the scale of support that China would need from the rest of the world in order to continue its growth is immense. And the whole idea of the Chinese rise is that the Americans will, for some reason, pay for it all. Well, that was always kind of a reach.
But Peter, doesn't this then incentivize China to do something militarily? Are we going back to the 20th century where taking over someone else's country and all their resources is actually profitable and maybe for the Chinese the only option?
For a number of countries, that is going to be seen as a viable option, but it's not one for China, because if they go to the southwest, they hit the Himalayas and they stop. If they go south, they hit Vietnam jungle mountains. And the last time the Chinese tried to go into Vietnam in 1979, they were treated to the same warm welcome that the Americans were.
The Vietnamese don't mess around.
Yeah. They can't go out. They hit the first island chain, and they don't have the naval power to punch through it. If they go north, the Russians have been very clear, going back to Yeltsin, that we won't meet you with men in tanks. We're just going to nuke you. There's nowhere to go.
God.
And their problem ultimately isn't really about resources. It's about population and market access. So
market access, because they don't have the Navy. They don't have what? Why can't they buy the oil they need? Why can't they
They can buy it so long as someone else ships it to them, because they can't control the high seas. They do have a lot of vessels, but most are very small with very limited range.
But why wouldn't the Russians? I mean, the Russians like money. Why wouldn't they want some yuan? I love asking my naive questions.
So, no. This is great. This is a great question because it comes up a lot. I love it. Okay, so when the Ukraine war started and the sanctions kicked in, especially the financial sanctions, and the Russians lost all their euro, gold, and dollars that were stationed abroad, they then bought nearly $500 billion of yuan assets, and were like thumbing their nose to the United States. See, we got other options. And then the day came that they needed to cash in some of those yuan assets to do things, and the Chinese like, no, that's all right. We don't want them back. And the Chinese discovered that they just lost $500 billion. So the Russians are just quietly now going back to euros and dollars on the black market because it's more reliable than dealing with the Chinese.
Jeez. Wow. Man. And so if you're Putin, I thought Putin would be pulling his hair out, but
he doesn't have any.
He doesn't have any hair. Good point. I was being metaphorical. I'm a very metaphorical person here. But I thought to myself, this Ukrainian war was a disaster. I don't see how Russia gets out of this without losing a lot of face. And I want to get your take on that. But if you're Putin, what keeps you up at night?
Well, if you're Putin, you're probably not getting a lot of sleep these days. A lot of things have gone wrong.
Yeah.
Let me start by saying that this war is nowhere near over.
It's not.
The Russians have not fully mobilized. The first phases of the war, they only had 100,000 troops in theater. They have 8 million men aged 20 to 30 that can potentially be drafted. They have only to this point drafted about 300,000. And I expect by the time we get to May's kind of the date to watch, because they have a mud season in Ukraine, which will be March and April, or just finished October and November, when the trees are pretty much bare. The ground has not frozen solid, and it's just murky, and you can't really do a lot of mobilized warfare in that sort of environment.
Dude, I gotta stop you. It's so nuts. It's your breadth of knowledge is so insane. You know everything from soil to I'm reading the book and I'm like, the guy knows everything about like what the soil is and why there's ice over here at this time. I mean, I don't know how you keep all this in your head. It's the craziest shit. Where do you get your information? It's obviously not CNN or Fox. You know what I mean? I'm like, he knows everything. I know you're a global strategist, and I know that there are a lot of companies that hire you to kind of tell them what they should do and where they should go. You know, for me, it's like, hey, Peter, what should I invest in? That's what I want to know. But because your detail is insane. I mean, how do you have the time to figure this shit out? I mean, we'll get back to this in a second, but can you maybe give us this is such an unfair question, but where do you get your information? What are you reading? Who are you listening to? What books are you reading?
Every time we get a new client, we have to learn the world from their point of view.
Okay.
So if I have a client that grows soy in North Dakota, I have to learn the global soy market. And that takes me into Brazil, the geography and the finance of Brazilian development and what's going on in Ukraine and the third largest soy market. And then I go into finance, and then I go into manufacturing, then I go into transport. I've given probably about 800 presentations since I started doing this about 10 years ago. And then for the 12 years before that, I worked for a firm where I was the only generalist on staff. And it was my job to take all the specialist work and knit it together to show how it fit. You do this for 20 years.
It's such a unique talent, though, because it's always changing, and like it's just infinite. Again, it's like just people should read.
There's always another layer.
I mean, just on like your example of blue jeans, your example of, how cobalt is a major player and who has cobalt. I mean, it's just, and so that just requires you to read what? Where do you get your news?
I read everything is the short version. Back before I started doing this 10 years ago, the company that I was at had a really good open source monitoring system. Unfortunately, most global media has kind of gone since then. Yeah. So I still have the original list of all the local news sources around the world, and we just do a general sweep of them every few days to see what's new. We spend most of our time looking for things that prove us wrong. It's not neat as friendly to the ego, but it's a big time saver.
So back to Russia. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It just kind of blows my mind.
May is when you want to watch.
Yeah, May.
Because that'll be when mud season is over. So two things will have changed. Number one, the Ukrainians will have had the entire winter to deferred maintenance on all that Russian gear that they've captured, and they'll be bringing new hardware in from the West. At the same time, the Russians will probably have at least another 500,000 men that they've thrown into the war.
And Russian wars they're not pulling it. They're not pulling back.
No. From the Russian point of view, the only thing that would be worse than not launching this war in the first place would be to launch it and fail, to pay all the prices for the conflict, but not get what they were after, which is a more securable.
What are they after? They're after a more secure border. Can't they do that with guarantees? Can't Zelensky and his group just say, we swear to God, we're not going to join NATO, and we swear to God, we're not going to arm the border, and we swear to God, we're not going to be a nuclear power.
Yeah, Ukraine had said that as of January of this year, and you can see how seriously the Russians took it. Anytime people are talking about security guarantees for the Russians, you know that they've bought into the Russian propaganda. Keep in mind that when this war started, you already had several percentage of Ukraine's territory that was already under Russian occupation from the last war.
Crimea.
Yeah, Crimea, the Donbass. This is the 7th time that Putin has done this since 1999 in the former Soviet world. He's going to keep pushing until he gets to an outer perimeter that he thinks is more securable. Unfortunately,
But
that includes parts of Romania and Poland.
Is this a romantic need to create the Soviet Union again? Is that what's going on?
I'm sure there's some of that, but that's not the primary issue. Russian territory is just really poor economically. It's some of the poorest land in the world for anything. And they've never had enough money to generate a road network. So what they do is they expand out until they reach zones that they can defend. Because think about Napoleon or Hitler. They rolled into the Russian interior, and it wasn't the Russians who defeated them. It was the weather.
Yeah, it was the winter.
The only way that the Russians have ever discovered that they can be safe is if they can plug the access points that allow countries to get into their space in the first place. That's Poland. That's Romania. So the question was never, will the Russians stop before they get all of Ukraine? No. It's like, what will they go for after they've taken all of Ukraine?
Do you think the Russians... Do you think the Russians would actually go from Ukraine and then into Poland?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, I know. There's never been any doubt in the Russian mind. This has always been the goal.
But Poland is a NATO member, yeah?
Yep. So there's a lot of details that have to be worked out between today and then, because obviously first they have to beat the Ukrainians. But
Which
we
is
now know,
right? I mean,
it's in play. I can't predict where the war is going to go. The first year of every Russian war looks just like this one. It's a shit show.
Yeah.
And then the Russians throw 1 million men at it, and the math changes. We haven't had that change yet.
It's so awful. I can't believe we're talking about this in 2022. I mean, the poor Ukrainians, we're
going to see a lot more of this.
And we're going to see a lot more Ukrainian civilians dead, aren't we?
Yeah. Until such time that the Russians can regain the strategic initiative, and it's possible that they won't. Their best play is to make Ukraine utterly uninhabitable.
It's just unbelievable that these are men that think in such a different way. It's dark.
Differently motivated is for sure.
I guess it's geopolitics. You're just a sociopath. It doesn't matter. Here we go. Right? I mean, but that's what a resource drain on the Russians.
Well, this is their last real conventional war. They only have those 8 million men of the appropriate age. And if they are fighting or dying, they are not having kids. And Russia is already the second worst demographic structure in the world after China.
So the Putin is in a rock and a hard place here.
Yes. Now, the first 7 times that he did things like this, the world handed him exactly what he was after. This is the first time that people have pushed back.
Wow. Okay. Well, he didn't expect this pushback, did he?
No, he did not. That's obvious.
Okay. So great. So do you think, looking back on COVID, do you think this was a massive overreaction? Masking, lockdowns, or is this not even worth talking about when we're dealing with these seismic changes? I mean, well, one of the things I kind of like brought things in perspective is you were like, the United States is doing so fantastic. Thank you, geography. Thank you, waterways. Thank you, all the other things. I'm just lucky. But we're doing amazing when our debates are around gender neutral bathrooms, etc. And I thought to myself, my God, what a luxury we have. The Ukrainians are not worrying about gender affirming fucking care, and so on and so forth. The Americans have no idea. All of us had no idea how bad it can be and how bad it actually is and how bad it's going to be for everyone else. Right? I mean, you'd rather be an American.
Oh, yeah. No, given the choice, I think I was born in the right spot. No argument there.
Yeah. And you're way more optimistic about America's future, primarily because we have access to we're the number 1 oil producer in the world. Thanks to shale technology. And also we have a population that seems to be young and robust enough to support our economy and everything else. Yeah.
And the country with the best demographic in the developing world is our primary trading partner. So we know that these trends have decades to run.
Right. Mexico. And so your advice to the countries, I mean, what would you tell the Russians and the Chinese, honestly? What do you tell the Germans? And by the way, you're worried about Germany too. Germany has some major problems.
God, there's a ball of wax to unwind. Okay, let's start with the Chinese. The Chinese are now in a position where the only way that they can survive as a nationality, forget even a country at this point, is to strike some sort of long-reaching deal with the United States. The Japanese showed that you can have a very proud, very successful country that can do this because they cut a deal with Trump that was humiliating, but they knew it was necessary for their demographic, economic, and strategic survival. And then they cut the exact same deal with the Biden administration to show that you could do it with both sides of the political aisle. They're the only country that's ready for what's coming. China would have to do something similar.
What is that deal?
Oh, it's a trade deal on Trump's terms. So every niggling issue in the relationship was resolved and hardwired into the Japanese system according to Trump American preferences permanently.
Trump had a really, at least for what you can say, he had a pretty strong command of how international trade and geopolitics works.
Yeah. I would say that he had an excellent trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, and Robert Lighthizer was the only person in the Trump cabinet that that served the entire term and actually had influence the whole time. And for whatever reason, and I don't have a good answer for why, Trump trusted Lighthizer to do his job, and he did a great job.
So your advice to China: cut a deal, a humiliating deal.
It's going to be awful. There's no way around it because they basically have to give up on everything that they've said publicly that they want.
So forget Taiwan,
among other things.
Okay,
forget semiconductors.
I'm sorry.
Forget semiconductors.
What do you mean?
The Chinese have proven that they can't reverse engineer mid and high quality semiconductors. They can only do the low end and only with imported equipment. And that has to be codified into any sort of long-term deal that China, you're just not going to be a tech producer because we can't trust you with anything.
We can't trust them with anything because they steal things and because they'll try to make it their own.
These aircraft carriers, those go away. The intellectual property theft, that goes away. And you better figure out how to democratize before we write that system for you.
So that's another thing. So
there's no way that the CCP in its current form could survive the deal. But if China is going to survive, a deal is necessary.
Leave your ethnic minorities alone. Leave Tibet alone. Leave Taiwan alone. Stop stealing from us. I mean, my God,
it's a long list.
Your intelligence apparatus has to kind of like close. I mean, this is all good news for the United States.
Yeah. Now, this deal will never happen because the CCP will not allow itself to disassociate. But that's what would have to happen. For the Russians, I don't think it's possible. There is no way to have a Russia that is secure and to have Russian neighbors that are secure. And the Americans have already chosen to ally with most of the neighbors, even before the Ukraine war started.
Russia basically...
Russia dissolves in the first half of this century if it loses the war, and in the second half of this century if it wins.
It dissolves. You keep saying so. This is again. It's like Russia and China are going to dissolve.
Yeah,
they will become what? Semi-feudal states. They'll just. What do you think happens? Is it anarchy? Is it
partially? There's a lot of examples. The Russians will probably disassociate into 30 or 35 warring principalities. That will just kind of become not so much a no man's land, but a shifting feudal conflict zone.
Jesus, man, what a bleak. Somebody called you the I think the Prince of Doom or Doom porn or whatever.
I prefer the purveyor of doom porn. Yes.
And what are you? I mean, you say this. We will no longer be on the same side. I mean. The people that are on the same side will no longer be on the same side. Everything is going to kind of it's going to dissipate into these sort of semi-feudal states. I mean, that's the only thing that with in the case of Russia,
yeah. In the case of China, the northern third, the North China Plain, that'll probably descend into kind of a neo-Maoist tyranny, complete with the famine. And then the southern city-states from Shanghai to Hong Kong will probably become semi-independent and interface with foreigners for everything from technology to trade to food supply, which historically speaking is how they've typically operated.
What about North Korea? I think about them all the time.
North Korea is a black hole. No one really knows because everybody's spies have been killed, including China's.
What do you mean? Wait, everybody's spies in North Korea?
Yeah, nobody has good information for what's going on. The best guess, It is a guess, but it's the guess that's been passed to me from a lot of intelligence officials in a lot of countries, is that Kim Jong-un, the current guy, when he was liquidating his father's generation to make sure there wasn't going to be a coup, he discovered Twitter and started tweeting about things going on within the country in order to undermine other people's positions. And Trump assumed it was all about him. And that's where the fire and fury stuff came from. Is Trump assumed fire and fury meant Trump, and it really meant Pyongyang. And so Trump was like, well, I've got a bigger button. I can have more fire and more fury. And the Chinese found out about the fact that the Kim administration in North Korea was trying to calm the Trump administration down, which was leading to a conversation, which was leading to a summit. And the Chinese kind of lost it. And so they drug the younger Kim to Beijing to yell at him. And when it became apparent that they couldn't talk him out of meeting Trump, they put him in a little kiddie chair. And then they put Xi behind his big imperial desk with a booster chair so he could lecture down to the wayward province.
Oh, my God.
The Chinese loved it because it was very imperial. But Kim, on his way home, was like, call Trump, tell him that the summit's on. We're never talking to these fuckers again.
Really?
The North Koreans do not like China at all.
I thought China had total control over North Korea, but they don't.
No. It's like they are their largest trading partner, but they don't trade. So that really doesn't mean anything. North Korea is its own thing. And that makes it a wild card in every way that it can be.
They could be suffering from a famine right now we wouldn't know about.
Exactly.
It's so awful. It's just, you're right. We're just roll of the dice. If you're born in North Korea, woe is you. If you're born in the United States, I don't care what your situation is, at least you've got food, for God's sake. You know?
We're the largest producer of that too.
I'm sorry?
We're the largest producer of agricultural products as well.
Hallelujah, dude. I feel guilty. I am never complaining again. We're going to go back to, remember when we were, I'm 55, and I remember it was like there are starving people in India, there are starving people in China, there are starving people in, and that we're going to go back to that, which is astonishing to me. Everything I've ever read, Peter, is the future is bright. There is a great deal to celebrate. We are going to, the singularity is near, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, it sounds like the machinery is rusting and there's no replacement. It's somewhere in the garden.
I wouldn't put it quite that way, but think of it this way. The demographic transition that we have gone through since 1945 has defined a lot of our successes and a lot of our pending failures. So when birth rates started to drop in the 50s, when you had young adults with fewer kids, they had a lot more money to spend on things. And we got this consumption boom in various parts of the world. When those young adults went from their 20s and their 30s to their 40s, 50s, and early 60s, which is where they've been since 1990, they were saving for the retirement. So we had all this capital. And in order to make technology work at scale, to advance it at scale, you need a whole lot of money to push it through because you don't know what's going to work. So you work on a lot of different things at the same time, knowing that a lot of them aren't going to work out. Well, now that they're all moving into retirement, that capital is going away. And so the pace of technological advancement that we've been used to for the last 30 years was always just a moment in time. And during those 30 years, people drew a lot of straight line forecasts, assuming that the capital structure was never going to change. And that's where we got things like the singularity. That's where we got things like EVs. That's where we got the internet revolution. Well, the pace now has to not necessarily reverse, but slow down a whole lot because the money is no longer there. And there's no longer a lot of people in their 20s and their 30s to do the work in the first place. Now, in the United States,
about crypto. What about things like crypto? What about the decentralization of money?
Crypto is a poster child for the environment of 1990 to 2022 when capital has been available in limitless volumes. There was never anything there. And now that the money is going away, crypto is going away. In a world where we have carbon taxes, crypto's value is negative.
Wait, what? Explain that. Why?
It has no intrinsic value. It's not a method of exchange. It's not a store of value. As we're discovering, it's been an excellent vehicle for fraud. Yeah. And so its net value normally would be zero. But if it takes energy to produce it, and we have carbon taxes, then its net value is zero or negative. It's negative.
Okay. I mean, look, doom. But you make such an amazing argument for it that I have no. I mean, I'm an optimist. Are you at all optimistic in any way that maybe you're wrong here? Maybe.
Oh, I hope I'm wrong about most of it, except for crypto. Crypto was always a horrible idea.
So you don't invest in crypto? I don't either. I don't either. It just never made any sense. It was, but I
mean, let's assume that all of my worst case scenarios are true, which I'm afraid that most of them probably are. There is no reason to expect the energy complex in the United States to suffer, or the food complex, and we're probably going to see a doubling of the size of the industrial plant at the same time we integrate more tightly with Mexico than we have with any other country throughout our history. These are all good things. These are durable. These are large scale. These give us economies of scale. And on the other side of this, the North American system is going to rewrite the human condition. So is there a lot to be a little concerned about? Certainly. But the end picture here is actually pretty bright.
The end picture for the United States is pretty bright.
Yes. And any country that's part of the Friends and Family program.
So South America?
South America looks broadly okay. They're probably not going to experience any of the sort of military shocks that the Eastern Hemisphere will have. They won't have shortages of food or energy.
United States, Canada seems to be fine.
That'll be fine.
Western Europe.
Western Europe is a mixed bag. So the further east you go, the sketchier things get because of the proximity to Russia. And if you're dependent
but you've got their oil. Easier to get a pipeline to Germany.
If you're willing to take it, and if they're willing to maintain output, yes.
But they have to take it, regardless of what happens in Ukraine. I mean, what is Germany going to do? 9% of their green come. Well,
think about what happened back in September. On September 1, the Russians shut down the Nord Stream natural gas pipeline and told the Germans, look, we know that without this, not only does your electricity go offline, your entire manufacturing system fails. So side with us, abandon the NATO coalition, stab Ukraine in the back, or deindustrialize. And the Germans decided to deindustrialize, which is not...
How long? How long are they going to deal with it? Go back to the farms? I mean, this is Germany.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the
German system is on borrowed...
Fifth largest economy in the world.
Yeah, not for long. The German system cannot function without bottomless volumes of natural gas, and those are no longer available anywhere.
Did Angela Merkel not see this when she made that deal with Russia? Did she not see that this
for her entire 12 years as chancellor, she was buying time in order to not have to face this decision. And she was lucky enough that it all went down weeks after she stepped down.
So she's going to go down in history as one of Germany's biggest, the architect of Germany's downfall.
Well, the Germans never had the capacity to impose a replacement system. All she could do was operate within the parameters of the environment she was in. Because, the world, when it hears that Germany is taking strong military and economic policies, we all get a little twitchy.
Yeah.
For good reason.
I mean,
so she knew that. So she did what she could with the resources she had, and she generated what turned out to be a German golden age. But it was never for forever.
And what about, so Germany's in deep shit.
Germany ceases to be a significant power. Poland, if they can figure out the security and the energy question, Poland's got a good 20-year run. But their demographics are not all that much better than the Germans or the Russians.
But they at least are closer to Russian oil, and they can kind of play nice.
Yeah, the Poles and the Russians usually don't play nice. And remember, there's two scenarios of how this war ends. War number one, where the Russians do well, they conquer parts of Poland. Scenario number two, where the Russians do badly, they disintegrate, and you shouldn't count on the energy anyway.
Oh my God, yeah. And now you're dealing with like individual brokers and warlords and stuff, whoever has control of that.
But there are parts of the European system that'll probably do fine. In a post-Germany EU,
the UK, how's the UK?
The UK will basically either get a free trade agreement with the United States or apply for statehood. I mean, that's the future for the UK.
Or apply for statehood, sir.
It's perfectly normal for parents to move in with their kids. It happens everywhere.
Oh, I thought you meant statehood, like be part of the United States.
I did.
Peter, I could just see every Brit like doing this. I mean,
they're either going to get terms of a deal that are much worse for them than it was for the Japanese, or they're going to find a way to make themselves closer. And the only way to do that is statehood.
Dude, I mean, but they have a great Navy. This is the UK, for God's sake.
They have a great Navy, but they gutted the rest of their military to get those super carriers out there, and they no longer have the fleets necessary to protect the super carriers. So those super carriers can only sail with an American escort ring. They functionally are not an independent country now.
They aren't because of Brexit, or just because of 1,000?
Because of the way they did Brexit.
Big mistake.
They cut off their foot to leave the EU and don't have a backup plan. 6 years on, they still don't have a backup plan.
Scandinavia, how are they going to do?
Scandinavia, positive demographics. Trade system is not dependent on the Russians or even the Germans. And they, from a defense point of view, are practically best buds with the United States already. So you bring Finland and Sweden into NATO, which is imminent. And I can see them basically entering an extended NAFTA system as well and doing very well for themselves.
Okay. So it's not all doom. Half of the world is going to be okay. But if you're Russia, if you're China, if you're Kazakhstan, if you're Dagestan, if you're Azerbaijan, if you're Armenia, how's Armenia going to do?
Armenia now has to deal with a world where the Turks are the preeminent power in their neighborhood. They are not prepared for that politically.
Yeah. And the Turks, how about the Turks?
Turkey will probably do fine. Solid manufacturing base. Everything that gives the Germans problems is going to be an opportunity for Turkey. And they are by far the most powerful country in their neighborhood. And if there's any version of Russia that survives, it will be dependent on the Turks to access the wider world. So I see a very bright future for the Turks.
Wow. And by the way, a lot of Germany is Turkish, right? I mean, huge.
Based on who's deciding who's in what bucket, probably 10 to 15%.
Think about that. That's crazy. The world is changing, man. Finally, and I've taken up a lot of your time, and I can't wait to go back and read this book. It's such an important book. It's such an ambitious move. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're going to follow up on this thing, dude. Good luck. Good luck with that. But is there anything? Are you wrong about anything so far, or are you doubling down and are you right about everything?
I'm pretty confident on all the big trends. The biggest challenge for any forecaster, and no exception for me, is timing. I mean, I can tell you that the financial system that undergirds all things China is unstable. It's basically Enron on a good day, and it's going to collapse. But it's been like that for 15 years, and they're still here. So things happen faster or slower. COVID sped along things far more than Trump did, and Trump sped things along more than any president yet. Deciding when this stuff is going to go down, and that's a nice way of saying which order it's going to go down, has always been the biggest challenge.
Does the United States move more toward a socialist form of government economy or more toward a capitalist?
Definitely more towards socialist because of the baby boomers. They have voted themselves the world's richest benefits policy. And they're now retired. On average, they retire actually this quarter. And they have the votes to make sure that those transfers continue hell or high water. And the millennials, who are the second largest voting bloc, will support them all the way up, because the alternative is the boomers moving in with the millennials. And from the millennials' point of view, that's a strictly one-way relationship.
Wow. So benefits, expansion of Medicare, expansion of Social Security, expansion of all those.
It'll be up to Gen X and the Zoomers to pay for it.
Do we have the tax base to pay for that?
Not even close.
Not even close. So we're going to borrow money, or we're going
to borrow to pay for the boomers, and then the millennials will probably close down those programs so they don't have to pay for them until Gen X is dead. And then when it's millennials' turn to get the benefits, they will vote them back, and we do this again. It's
kind of like what some of these California towns do, where we hire politicians that give all these incredible pension plans to our retiring firemen, safety, personnel, and police personnel, and all of a sudden we don't have the tax base to support it.
How did that happen?
Yeah, well, see Greece, by the way. See Greece as an example. How is Greece going to do? You're not optimistic.
Oh my God, no. I mean, Greece became a ward of the European Union back in 2007. It's actually in a worse debt position now than it was then. And now the Europeans are about to lose their single largest form of funds in the shape of Germany. So yeah, Greece is a ward, or it's a failed state. There's really no other option at this point.
There's
less industry now there than there was 20 years ago.
My God, there's I guess there's the sea, there's fish, and there's tourism.
Yeah,
That's
and
it.
tourism during COVID was zero.
So, being a man in the prediction business, knowing so much, where do you put your money?
I'm not a CFA, so let's start with that.
I understand, but
I like companies that have most of their operations in the United States who are in industries that are energy intensive. Courtesy of the shale sector, we have the world's cheapest electricity and oil. I like products that are where their demand is demographically driven. And if the end product is exportable, that's kind of my trifecta. So anything that is in energy processing, petrochemicals, food processing, those are kind of at the top of my list.
because there's going to be an endless need for that.
Yeah, there's a need, there's an ability to get it to where it needs to go. And the United States is already the world's most competitive economy in those sectors before the competition even gets hit. So if the competition gets hit, holy crap.
Who is going to buy from us? I mean, because it sounds like the ruble and the yuan is going to be useless in about 15 or 20 years, or maybe less, right?
The single largest purchaser of American energy products at the moment is
India.
Mexico.
Oh, it's Mexico.
But the more problems we have in the Russian space, the Europeans are moving up that list very, very rapidly. And in terms of food production, Mexico is again number one, but we are looking at catastrophic collapse in China's ability to grow its own food or import. So those southern cities from Shanghai to Beijing, I'm sorry, from Shanghai to Hong Kong, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a population bigger than Mexico.
And by the way, India is going to be fine. Yeah.
India is broadly going to be fine. Yes. A lot of this stuff passes them by. They're the first stop out of the Persian Gulf for energy. They have an advanced petrochemical system, so they can process a lot of their own fertilizer. They're going to have to make decisions like the United States. If we want stuff, we have to build it ourselves. They're going to have to do the same thing.
China, there's no incentive for China to invade India. That would be suicide.
Himalayas are in the way. Not
Himalayas
possible.
are in the way. God, I can't wait to go back and read this book again.
There's a lot of pictures.
yeah, a lot of pictures. It's such an ambitious book. And again, it's just, I've been alive a long time and I've read a lot of stuff. And once in a while, I'll come across a book and I just am astonished at its breadth and its in your ability to tie all these things together, and also to just have such a deep understanding of how every single country works. I mean, your command of soil, rainfall, all the different materials. I mean, you've got this whole these chapters on like future materials, reliable materials. I mean, it's just mind-boggling how much goes into everything I do. The coffee I drink, the food I eat, the clothing I wear. That's kind of what blows my mind. So I don't know, man. The end of the world is just the beginning by Peter Zeihan. I think it's a must read. Yeah, it's a must read, dude. It's such a great. How is it being received? Are you selling well? I mean, it's kind of.
Well, we made the bestseller list, and the Financial Times just put us on their Reader's Choice Awards, which was crazy. 10 books, Financial Times, kind of hoity-toity, very financial. Yeah. I was the only economics book, which I found flooring. But yes, it's being received very well.
It shouldn't be flooring, man. You deserve it. You're
Thank you.
You've got the whole package, man. And you're 6'5" with a man bun. It's bullshit. I'm pissed off.
Bryan